back from the brink of nuclear war. Delegates from North and South Korea meet for the first time in 2 years. Could this be the breakthrough to bring peace? I'm Imran Gupta, and today's Newsmaker is the Inter-Korean talks. As North Korean delegates stepped over the demarcation line, it represented a step away from hostilities. The last formal communication between the North and South was in 2015, and it ended pretty badly. The North was angered by the South's decision to pull out of a joint economic project. And since then, the relationship has been increasingly tense. But could things be changing? These talks seem to have been more fruitful than expected. Pyongyang says it will now send a delegation to the Winter Olympics in South Korea, and both agreed to hold military talks. So is this the start of a promising thaw in relations? Randolph Nogel reports.
Along the most militarized border in the world, a diplomatic pause in a conflict more than 70 years old. A delegation of 5 people from Pyongyang crossed over to meet their South Korean counterparts.
Our talks begin after a long period of severed ties between the North and the South, but I believe the first step is half the journey.
At the end, both sides agreed that North Korean athletes could attend next month's Winter Olympics. They also agreed to hold future military talks and re-establish a hotline between the two countries. It will be the first time North Korea will take part in the Winter Games since 2010 in Vancouver. This particular brand of sport diplomacy has historical precedence in the conflict, albeit to little effect. As far back as 1964, the two Koreas have discussed fielding a joint Olympics team and have raised a unification flag at major sporting events in the past. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has said he wants to see that happen again. There have been major concerns that Pyongyang could cast a shadow over the upcoming Winter Games in South Korea. And with good reason. The year before it hosted the 1988 Summer Olympics, 115 people were killed in a plane bombing carried out by 2 North Korean agents. And in 2002, when South Korea co-hosted the World Cup, Pyongyang's patrol boats opened fire on a South Korean Navy ship in the Yellow Sea. 6 South Koreans were killed. The surprise move by North Korea to hold the first talks with its neighbor in more than 2 years has allayed some fears of a similar scenario.
Regarding the nuclear issues, our strategic weapons, including the atomic bomb, hydrogen bomb, and intercontinental ballistic missiles, are only aimed at the United States, not our brethren.
Conspicuously missing from the meeting were any representatives from the administration of US President Donald Trump, although he did take credit.
It's a start. It's a big start. If I weren't involved, they wouldn't be talking about Olympics right now. They'd be doing no talking, or they would be much more serious.
After a year of belligerent hyperbole exchanged between North Korea and the United States, the talks between the two Koreas have come as a relief. But the looming issue remains North Korea's nuclear program, something Pyongyang says isn't up for discussion. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Medford, Massachusetts by Sung-Yoon Lee. He's the Kim Koo-Korea Foundation Professor of Korean Studies at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. And in Washington, retired Professor Han Park. He's the founding director at the Center for the Study of Global Issues. And completing our panel from Hong Kong, we have David Zweig. He's the director of the Center on China's Transnational Relations at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Gentlemen, I thank you all for joining us. Han Park, let me begin with you, sir. So it's a bit of a cliche for people to say sport might bring about reunification and peace, but might that actually happen when it comes to North and South Korea when we look at what's going to happen in Pyeongchang?
Yes, I would think so. It's not Pyeongchang itself. It's the climate change. In Korea, South Korea, you have a new government, very progressive Moon Jae-in regime as a result of people's so-called candlelight revolution. In North Korea, we have a new leadership, that requires very urgently the supply of food and energy. So these things combined with the Pyeongchang Olympic event will mix very well. Yes, the Pyeongchang thing will be quite successful, and it will lead to some further development in inter-Korea.
Okay, so Sung-Yoon Lee, just a few months ago, everybody was talking about, Dennis Rodman being the last hope for anyone to ever talk to the North Koreans. Now we're seeing the South Koreans and the North Koreans actually talking to each other. Big momentum shift, right?
It is, and the atmospherics have changed far more favorably than they have been over the past few months. But one has to ask, why now? Did Kim Jong-un all of a sudden wake up on New Year's Day and have a change of heart? Of course not. His annual New Year's address is prepared weeks, if not months ahead of time. South Korea was awarded the Winter Olympiad many years ago, back in 2011. So why now? Well, after a triumphant, ballistic year in 2017, it makes perfect sense for Kim to de-escalate, dangle a few carrots, change the dynamics so that South Korea would take the bait and be in a position to take the leading role in prematurely relaxing sanctions against North Korea, which have become quite tough over the past year. So North Korea is very good at wielding both the carrot and stick. Now, will this be good for the region? Sure, in the short term, but on the thorny question of nuclear issues and missile programs, nothing will change.
Okay, so David Zweig, Sung-Yoon Lee long-term doesn't trust them. He believes this is a bit of a ploy. Are you as cynical?
Well, I think it certainly helps to have this kind of discussion. But, we've seen before new presidents come in who are much more interested in what we call sunshine policy and talking to the North. And the North has been willing to talk. They've gotten money off of it. We know that they've been paid. Kim Jong-un, Kim's father was paid a significant amount of money to engage in talks. So there's usually something behind it. But again, I think even Professor Park, who has a very upbeat view of this, recognizes that the sanctions, I think, are probably also biting. So I think it's atmospherics. But I think it's also that the North's under pressure from the sanctions. So I think it's both.
Han Park, the other two gentlemen are not as optimistic as you are. Tell me why you're so optimistic as you see this unfolding.
Inter-Korea relations, one has to realize that there is a strong element of nationalism, both in the North and the South. They're divided for such a long time with millions of separated families in the generally Confucian society where family is a very important element. So here, that nationalism in fact, forced the North and South Korean regimes, current regimes, to be talking to each other because North Korea needs economic development, South Korea needs further legitimization for the entire peninsula. So this is a good time, and without underlying nationalism, this would not have happened that swiftly.
Yeah, Professor Park, who bends? Just a second, David, just a second. I just want to ask Professor Park, who bends, right? Because I remember when I was in North Korea, clearly, you ask them, what's the population of your country? They say 75 million, because they include the South as well. They consider themselves one people. They want reunification, but they want it on their terms. They give no indication that they're willing to bend whatsoever in order to have reunification as a kind of push and pull and listening to the other side. On the other hand, you have the South and the West and everybody else saying this Juche system, which is a hodgepodge of communism and other things, doesn't work, it's terrible, it causes famine, and so on. So my question is, who's actually going to bend if you have a peace deal?
No one should bend. The two systems are so different. They each is complete sovereign state. And therefore, the only way of putting these guys together is by recognizing their uniquenesses, their rules, characteristics, So we've got to have some sort of confederate system where two systems are mutually respected and accepted. That's the only intermediate stage toward unified Korea.
Okay, David, you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, I taught for many years, in fact, at the Fletcher School. And one of the things that always struck me when I taught was how strongly Korean students felt that this is really something that it's very, very important to them. On the other hand, you know, I think that the push for reunification in South Korea has decreased over time. The new younger generation, I think, really doesn't care that much. They've grown up in a separate world. You know, leftist students used to go to the border and carry out massive protests in support of reunification. I get the sense, and maybe the other two speakers want to talk about this, but I get the sense from my interactions that it's just that will for reunification within the younger generation has died. So it's, you know, there may not be so much support from the South.
Maybe within South Korea, you are correct to a certain extent. It's a very pragmatic capitalist system. But things will change. You have to look at both sides.
Right.
The element of unification, the nationalism in South is strong, still very strong, even younger generation.
Right. Let me bring in Sung-Yoon Lee and ask if it's actually possible, as has been suggested, to have the kind of integrity ideologically and politically of both systems under some sort of umbrella as the end goal, or whether that ship has sailed and we're merely in a situation where we don't want North Korea to nuke anyone, and that's what peace is.
In the real world, a fair, equitable merger between a giant multinational corporation, shall we say, and a startup mom-and-pop store is impossible. You have to look at the nature of the two Korean states. You have a model failed state, an extreme totalitarian state in the Kim regime that is unique in world history for having attained the great advantages of full industrialization, urbanization, and near 100% literacy among the adult population, yet to have suffered a famine. In the South, you have a far more successful, attractive, legitimate state that is a magnet to the North Korean people. So this kind of equal basis unification, a merger between the two Korean states, is a fantasy. On Professor Park's point of strong ethnic nationalism, I fully agree, and this has actually negative implications in the short term. For North Korea, trumping up this pan-Korean bond, identity, Koreanness, by us, ourselves, Korean only, exclusive of the US, that sentiment resonates powerfully both in the North and South. And that sentiment is expressed in the Korean 우리 민족끼리. Literally, it means by ourselves, Koreans only. And North Korea runs a propaganda website under that name. And that formulation, that phrase, appears in various statements between the two Korean states. And it's benignly translated into English as inter-Korean relations. That 민족, ethnic Korean people, that word appears 4 times in a 3-paragraph long joint statement that just came out of the first round of inter-Korean talks. What that means is, under the rubric of Korean identity, taking charge of their own destiny, independent of the pesky US, you will see discussions and negotiations in the coming weeks on controversial issues like restarting inter-Korean economic projects and so on. And the intent here on the part of the North is to drive a wedge between the South and the United States so that we go back to the heady old days of South Korea unconditionally subsidizing North Korea as the US is trying to sanction the same target. That leads to policy incoherence, contradiction. It's a small victory for Kim Jong-un.
Okay, so David Zweig, for the moment, the Trump administration isn't as cynical as Professor Lee about this situation. They're actually taking the credit for what's going on now. So we saw a sort of good cop, bad cop thing going on with Trump's tweets on the one hand, little rocket man, fire and fury and whatever. And on the other hand, you have Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, saying we want to talk to the North Koreans and we want a deal, right? The U.S. is taking the credit for this. Are they right to?
I'm not sure that I would see that as a coherent strategy of good cop, bad cop. That could just as easily have been incoherence within the Trump administration. So
does that incoherence play any part in what's happening right now?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm not sure. You know, I think that Kim sees, as Professor Lee said, I think Kim sees Kim in the North sees a good chance to drive a wedge between the U.S. And the South, particularly when you've got a leadership that supports sunshine policy, a leadership in the South that actually wants to have and is willing to make serious concessions. I think when you say who's going to bend, I mean, it looks like the South's going to bend. I mean, this costs the North nothing to go to this meeting. They don't have to talk very much or rarely talk about or really don't raise the issue of nuclear. They're going to hold on to their weapons. I think they'll make no concessions on that. And to a certain extent, I may disagree with Professor Lee on this. I think that they're smart to have the weapons. I think from their perspective, the United States is a serious threat to the North Korean regime. And I think the United States has to send out a message very clearly. And I think that was partly Tillerson's message, that the United States is not interested in regime change, and that maybe if the discussion had been like that, maybe the North might not have built the nuclear system, but the weapons. But they've been planning that for a long time.
So, Han Park, let me ask you, because this is the suggestion built into what the other two guests are saying, that Moon Jae-in might be being played right now by the North. He might be taken for a ride in a process in which he capitulates and a wedge is driven between him and the United States.
Yeah, I think we've got to look at North Korea, not just a failed system, but a unique system. What system in the world with that kind of economic difficulty and political isolation would have developed military capability as well as North Korea? It's impossible. It's an anomaly. One has to be able to explain that. I have explained it. I have visited North Korea some 50 times. I know that system inside out. But if you define North Korea as a failed system, then you're looking at through the lens of Germany or South Korea.
Okay.
That it will not work.
Okay, interesting point. Let me ask Sung-Yoon Lee, and this will be our final word. Not a failed system, just a unique system. That should be your starting point when you talk to them, and then you might see things turn out better. That's the proposal by Han Park. Tell me why you're not so sure about that.
Well, North Korea is truly unique. According to virtually all annual surveys by credible human rights watchdogs, in terms of press freedom, religious freedom, basic freedom, freedom of speech, information, North Korea comes in without fail dead last. So North Korea is unique in that not so favorable aspect. What does that mean? It means, again, you have in the Korean Peninsula 2 Korean states, an ongoing contest for pan-Korean legitimacy. And as Trump said, addressing the South Korean National Assembly a couple of months ago, the sheer existence of a successful, thriving South Korea presents a challenge. It threatens the very survival of the dictatorial North. So that is the reality that we have to understand. Sports diplomacy is inherently sexy, it's glamorous, and I think the very uniquely unglamorous nature of the Kim regime and the inherent glamour of sports diplomacy will probably produce a smashing success in terms of the Winter Olympics. But in the long term, it will favor Kim. Will the South and the United States gain anything on security interests? I don't think so.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. I'd love to have you on the show again in the future, but for the moment, Han Park, Sung-Yoon Lee, and David Zweig, thanks again. Still ahead on the Newsmakers, Iraqi civilians are being forced out of refugee camps and back home. But are they being sent to their deaths? And we speak to Italy's former foreign minister, Emma Bonino. We ask if Italy's refugee response is really the success story the government says it is. Welcome back to the Newsmakers. Life for many in Iraq is dangerous enough as it is, but now the country's security forces are reportedly pressuring civilians out of camps. But could leaving be more dangerous than staying? Most of the displaced Iraqis are being sent to Anbar province, which is mainly Sunni. It's an area aid workers say is so dangerous they risk being killed if they go there. So why are they being forced to leave? The government says Daesh has been defeated and it's time to move forward. But could there be another reason? Vanessa Keneally takes a look.
On the surface, it seems like the right thing to do, helping Iraqi families get back to their homes. But the problem is, it isn't safe yet.
My son was given a tent by the government and went back before us. While he was trying to pitch it in a yard, after being told that it was safe there, an explosion went off. His wife was killed instantly and he lost one eye, while the other needs several operations. His daughter was also seriously wounded.
Aid workers and refugees say Anbar province is still littered with booby traps left behind by Daesh. They also say people returning home are at risk from vigilantes. So why would the Iraqi government be exposing its people to such danger? Well, many believe it's because there's an election scheduled in May, and Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi wants it to happen on time. Buoyed by his recent defeat of Daesh, he now needs people to be at home to vote, but those who have returned say this tactic won't work.
If I go back and see my house destroyed, my money gone and my life ruined, why would I vote for them?
The United Nations says more than 3.2 million people have returned home, but aid workers in camps close to Baghdad say up to 5,000 people were forced to go back by Iraqi soldiers. The Iraqi military says these figures have been exaggerated, while critics of Abadi say the only numbers he is interested in are the ones he'll receive at the ballot box. If Abadi manages to secure a second term as leader, he'll have a lot of work to do. As well as stabilise and unite a country torn apart by 3 years of fighting Daesh, he has to weed out corruption, as well as deal with Iraqi Kurds hoping for independence. So, is the answer getting people back to their homes under any circumstances, or does it only threaten the country's fragile peace? Vanessa Keneally, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Manchester is Luqman Faili. He's the former Iraqi ambassador to the United States. From Baghdad, we have Ahmed Rushdie. He's the foreign policy advisor to the Speaker of the Iraqi Parliament. And in the Iraqi city of Karbala is Ali Dabbagh. He's a former Iraqi government spokesman. Gentlemen, I thank you all for joining us. Luqman Faili, let me begin with you, Mr. Ambassador. We have about 2.5 million people. There are reports that they are being forcibly returned to their homes and they don't want to go. Is the Iraqi government bungling this whole process?
I don't see it that way. And the 2.5 million are in different geographies, different towns, cities, some of them been there for a few months, some of them been there for over 2 years now. So to that effect, the government are trying to relocate them, take them back when they think they are safe. True, there is some unique situation in Anbar because of the close proximity. That's true, but that has not stopped the government from focusing on returning the refugees or internally displaced safely as soon as possible in a safe way. Okay,
so Ali Dabbagh, we have a situation where you have people who are deeply traumatized, of course, during the battle against Daesh. It's great that Daesh has, for all intents and purposes, been defeated. They've been in refugee camps. They have many worries. They have worries about booby traps. They have worries about vigilantism, about Daesh re-emerging. And of course, some of them have suffered at the hands of Hashd al-Sha'bi. Their homes don't really exist, most of them. Their homes have been reduced to rubble. Is the Iraqi government maybe not taking all of these considerations into account and trying to just rush to send them back?
I think it's one of the big challenges for the Iraqi government and Mr. Abadi and the local government of Al-Anbar as well as Mosul to bring them back homes. But I don't think that anybody could force them. You could see that the government being criticized as they are not allowing them to go back homes post-Daesh liberation of Mosul and Al-Anbar, and now the government is being criticized for forcing them. I don't think the government, the local government, Al-Anbar, as far as I know, that they are encouraging them. They are giving them some financial aid to repair the damages, which is for their houses. The problem arises for those who have their houses fully demolished, fully distracted, and they don't have a place to live. And they are not the majority. And actually, the government, it is connected to the election, by the way, that the people are giving these reports as to keep them in the refugee camp in order to give the causes that the election cannot be handled with the people being in the refugee camp. I'm quite sure that Haider al-Abadi is trying to solve this problem in order to have the election being executed in month of May. And of course, keeping them in the refugee camp, it is one of the negative issue with the election. Keep them there, because it's not easy to handle the election while they are in the camps. Plus, as I said, it is a big challenge to the government. So the government is encouraging them, actually, not forcing them.
Yeah. So, Ahmed Rushdi, it's unideal to have people in IDP camps during an election, undoubtedly. But isn't it worse trying to rush them back home because of that election? Might it not be worse?
First of all, there's a problem with the trust. There is no trust with the local government or the central government, is that they can maintain our needs in our homes, that if our homes is safe until now. All these things have been talking inside those camps. And enforcing people to go back, it's the same, just like it's the opposite that what Mr. Al-Dabbagh said. It's because the government want the elections to be held at the same time. It's supposed to be, even with all the obstacles that in hand. It's not only the IDP, it's the presence of the Hajj al-Shabi, it's the presence of booby traps, it's the presence of, there is no real infrastructure. All these things are not in hand, not real hand for the local government or the central government on those areas. So why enforcing people, why pushing them to the houses? Well, between brackets, encourage them to go to the homes. It's definitely to hold the elections at the same time it's supposed to be. But at the same time, the Prime Minister said the elections cannot be held until all the IDPs go back, first. Secondly, made appropriate arrangements for the IDPs inside their homes. And thirdly, there will be some sort of emergency projects for the infrastructure to be, let's say, to make it appropriate environment. And fourthly, which is a very important issue, the documentation issue, is that all these people who are going back, they have the real documents to participate with elections. And I think it's not easy. It's a hard task, and it cannot be held without about you cannot manage to do all these works in about, let's say, 3 or 4 months.
Yeah. Something that's interesting, one of the internally displaced Iraqis, Luqman Faili, whose name is Mahdi Ahmed, was quoted in Reuters, very cynical about the government's plan, saying the government has achieved the reverse of what it intended. He said, quote, "They are doing this because of the election, but if I go back and see my house destroyed, my money gone, and my life ruined, why would I vote for them?" So, I mean, these are not stupid people. Does he have a point?
No, certainly we should empathize and understand the background, the misery, the challenge that the civilians who were trapped or who were taken hostage by ISIS, and the government have tried to free them into these camps. Nobody should deny that. Certainly the environment is not best suited for them to go back, or that the election can be taken smoothly. However, the issue of the election, the calls is across all the politicians. They are calling for it. some are specifically in the Anbar and the Mosul areas. They are feeling that they are disgruntled politicians, and therefore they need to re-legitimize, and therefore that's the type of political game they are playing with the government. On the other side, the Prime Minister himself will not expect votes for himself in these areas anyway. So this is not a driver for him. On the contrary, he himself has called for the local authorities. He has empowered the provisional governors with the power of the authority of the Prime Minister to work with. So when we say the government, I hope we're not talking about the Prime Minister alone. I think we're talking about the local authorities, central government, other ministries, including the Ministry of Defense, who have authority on the area.
Okay.
Yes, we do have a challenge. We don't have an alignment of the political class, and certainly the government infrastructures are not fully equipped to deal with the masses of such a scale.
Okay, that's an interesting point. So let me ask Ali Dabakh, do we have a situation where the central government doesn't have full control over local government, and then that opens up the question of a kind of sectarian difference as well? Lack of trust, is that where we're at?
I don't think this arises now with Al-Anbar. The governor as well as the council, they are totally working with the policy of the Baghdad and the instruction of the cabinet. And I don't think there is a mistrust which was before with some of the, for example, with Mosul council, with even Al-Anbar certain times. But now I think that it is like a homogeneous issue between the Baghdad as well as Al-Anbar. I think the local government, they are taking the initiative to encourage the people to go back, as they are keen that the election need to be held on time and not to keep them, because by anyway keeping them in whatever the situation in their home back in Fallujah or in the other places in Al-Anbar, definitely is much better than, even with that destruction, is much better than living in a camps with the difficulties arises and the weather now and in the desert and the whole situation. At the end is the dignity of the people and the feeling of the people when they be back. Definitely it's a challenge. Definitely there is a complication and difficulties they are going to face, as well as the local government will face. But they are trying. As far as I know, yesterday I was speaking with the governor and with some of the council, and they said they are working day and night in order to do whatever they can within their capacity, within their financial capacity, in order to help the people to be back, even providing them some tent in there for those who have their houses fully demolished. Even they have, a tent, and they said live in this place rather than in a camp, which is you don't feel as you are a human being in the camp. Okay,
so Ambassador Luqman Faili, you're suggesting differences in terms of authority and maybe differences of opinion between the central government and local government. Ali Dabakh says no. What are you talking about? They're homogenous. They're all on the same page.
No, the governor of Anbar recently changed, and that was not changed because of a normal process. It was changed because of the problems internally within the governorate. So that's one reason. And we have the same across a lot of other governorates, even in Mosul, as Ali mentioned. So to that aspect, my point is politicians in Baghdad who are representative of that area, parliamentarians and others, are pushing for the people to go back because of the election aspect. On the other side, the election commission said they are happy to conduct these even if they are in the camps. So to that, I don't see the election as the main driver. Yes, I see it as a tool being used by the political class, unfortunately. People have to pay casualties for it. On the other side, I don't think it's safe for us to say that because of dignity, people can't go back to their camps and their derelict homes because that gives them dignity. The government is responsible to provide them a safe environment, whether they are in a camp or anywhere else. And that's an obligation on the government. There is a work with international organizations, including UN, to make sure of that aspect of it. So here, human rights should override any other right.
Right. Ahmed Rushdi, let me ask you about trust, because there can be laws on the books that are not discriminatory, but governments can set a tone in which large groups of people feel marginalized. A lot of people said in the past, Nur al-Maliki's government disenfranchised or marginalized, alienated Sunnis, which was one of the reasons for the rise of extremism and, for example, Daesh. We have a situation where you have Sunnis who were beaten and battered by Sunni extremists on the one end, and then on the other hand, you have Shia militias in the fight against Daesh, who sometimes did unspeakable things to these Sunnis as well. And now you find them in these camps going home and not really sure whether they want to go home. Let's talk about trust for a second. How can this government actually ensure that these people will trust that they're not going to take it out on them, that they're going to treat them as equal Iraqis and they want to give them a proper life in the present and the future?
Well, Imran, before that, they have a question. Why should I pay attention for the next election? Why should I participate in the first place in these elections? Does this election going to make my life different? All these questions now in mind, and it's supposed to be the responsible of the government, the central and the local, to build up a trust until the day of the elections, to say to them, it's your own duty inside the new political process to try to change things in Iraq. This is the first phase. The second phase, which is a very important issue that Mr. Al-Dabbagh said, that the local government actually doing their best. But the problem, yes, they are doing their best, but the problem, what are the results? Does the results will be a very good, or let's say a suitable environment to make the people going to participate in the elections? Is this rosy picture will happen? I don't think so, because Iraq has a financial crisis, first of all. And secondly, there are reports saying that until now there is Daesh about 3,000 fighters, and other reports saying that it's about 9,000 fighters. So what they're going to do in the day of elections, they're going to stay in their camps, or let's say they're going to stay in the tunnels or in the desert? Definitely they're going to do something to say to the people is that we are here. If you're going to participate in the elections, we are here. We're going to bomb. We're going to attack all these centers of elections. All these things in the mind of the people inside the camps. And also they want to show that their daily life needs is already on the table. So if they are now in the camps, it's more safe than to go home. And also, maybe it's a suitable environment also for his children and for his family as a single IDP. Now, there is another problem, is that the lack of trust made something else, is that what our future will be. How our future will be. We don't know the people that they're going to be elected. We don't know actually how they're going to manage our governorate. Is there any plan? Does the candidates already make a plan or may show them a plan for the future of Anbar, for example? All these things is in the mind in the IDP. And for sure, the sleeping cells of Daesh, they are waiting for something like that. They are waiting for those questions. Because if there will be no answer for all these questions, they will say to the people, okay, guys, you changed us. You deserve what's going to happen to you. Because at the end, we need to make a change inside Anbar just to make a picture is that it's different from Daesh.
Ali Dabbagh, Ahmed Rushdie has big fears for the next few months. A lot of questions he once answered. Do you agree with him?
No, partially I agree. But again, I mean, terrifying the people is not the right way. We have the worst situation was on 13th of January 2005, which we got nothing, no security forces, only the American by that time. And the people, although in spite of that, terrifying them that they come for election. And this is not connected with the IDP. This question which Mr. Ahmed raised, definitely is true for all Iraqis. It's not connected only to IDPs. There is an anger among all Iraqis about the elite and the politicians right now, which they had, mislead the Iraqis, and they didn't present, they didn't give it, they didn't fix the problems, they didn't give them the services, and finally they like participate or doing what is the end that Daesh and ISIS came to Iraq and occupy 1/3 of the country because of the wrong policies. Definitely, I do agree. But again, I don't think ISIS and the people of Al-Anbar, Al-Mosul, Salah ad-Din, those being terrified by Daesh. They are immune now from ISIS, no more. I don't think neither ISIS nor any other copy of ISIS could make them agree and satisfy that they are going to be an alternative for them. And I don't think any one of them could listen to any more this agenda, this ideology, because definitely they are immune because of the horrific situation they had faced.
Understood.
I do agree on that the difficulties which is they are facing definitely make them less participating in the election, because they found that those politicians, they are most of them liars. They are not giving them what they had promised for. So I do agree that the next election is a challenging election, and the people are less in percentage-wise. They will be less participating, but again, this is not connected to the IDP. IDP, they have their own problems, and I think the most immune people from listening to ideology of ISIS, they are the IDPs. Yes.
Okay, gentlemen, I've got to move on, but it's been a good education talking to all of you. I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Luqman Faili, Ahmed Rushdi, and Ali Ad-Dabbagh. Thanks so much.
The transition from crime to the management of this phenomenon is possible, and Italy is proving it with 1/3 reduction of arrivals this year. A 70% reduction in arrivals from July to present, and with a drastic reduction of deaths at sea.
Well, that was Italy's Prime Minister Paolo Gentiloni at the end of last year, effectively declaring that their refugee crisis was all but over. But did his announcement come too soon? On Monday, as many as 64 refugees drowned trying to reach Italy from Libya, the Mediterranean's first tragedy of 2018. But Rome says their efforts to stop refugee arrivals have been successful. Between 2016 and 2017, the numbers entering the country dropped by 1/3, but some argue their methods are too costly. The Italian government reportedly pays Libyan militias to stop smugglers. And with many more people still desperate to escape poverty and violence, can Italy call this a success? Well, to help us understand the situation better, I'm joined now by Italy's former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Emma Bonino. She's also a former EU Commissioner. Ma'am, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. The Prime Minister has said this is a success. It's a historic transition from immigration managed by criminals, as he called it, to controlled, legal and safe migration. The numbers are down. Fewer people are dying. Why do you disagree with him?
Well, the fact is that whatever you mean by success, for instance, just take January, the beginning has been very bad. 1,200 have been rescued by the Italian Coast Guard and brought to Italy. 700 people are being captured, basically by the Libyan Coast Guard, and brought back to the detention center, and they will disappear there. Nobody will know what happens to them. And in the meantime, by hundreds, they've been drowned at sea. So I don't know from what ground humanity, legally, it's claimed a success. And by the way, remember that it's January with very bad weather. Mm-hmm. So it's true that they have the landing has been diminished in Italy, but it means simply that more people are dying and more people are brought back to the terrible, terrible Libyan detention center.
Yeah,
so I don't think this is a success.
Yes, the fact that the government is working with Libya, that Libya doesn't have a formal centralized authority, it's split in two in many ways, and that there are these reports that the government's working with militias at a time when we've seen videos of especially black men being sold as slaves, literal slaves in markets. Is there any debate within Italy about whether this is morally justified?
Well, there were a very strong debate, let's say in September, October, November, when, by the way, we were running the campaign. That was a very successful campaign, collecting signatures for modification of the Italian law on integration. But now, media have been accustomed And on top of that, we are at the beginning of the electoral campaign. So the priority of the news are different. Of course, the government has all the interest of claiming positive results, which are very doubtful in my opinion. But the high priority debate on the electoral campaign are disregarding these tragedies in the Mediterranean.
Yes.
Political parties are much more involved in economic, internal situation, relation with Europe. So we are struggling to keep this issue on the front page of the newspaper and social.
Yes, interesting, those legislative elections on the horizon set for March 2018. Let me ask you about any regrets you might have about when you were in office. When you were the Minister for Foreign Affairs, you were in office for about a year. I looked at the IOM numbers. Around about that time, at least 700 people died trying to cross over. Yes, the politics were different at that time. The Syrian war was at a different phase. Lots of things were different. But looking back now, could you have done anything personally differently to prevent these tragedies when you had the power?
Well, what I'm very proud of having done with Prime Minister Letta is to start the Mare Nostrum program. And it was the first time that Italian boat with NGOs started this search and rescue after the tragedies, by the way, on our own, because the member states of Europe didn't want to help. So I'm very proud that we started this program that had some success. But the point again, I was in charge for 10 months, and the following minister and government stopped the program, and then it was, let's say, done again at European level. But the point is that you cannot stop completely this flow. And the point is that in a declining demographic Europe, you have to open up legal channels of immigration and a serious program of integration. That has not been done. I couldn't make it in 10 months, of course, but I'm very proud that with the Governo Letta, we started the Mare Nostrum, underlining to member states in Europe and to our public opinion that there was a tragedy going on since months that nobody cared about.
Yeah, and around about that time, I was in Lampedusa, and I witnessed the Italian Coast Guard rescue people. They went out about 100 kilometers out. There was a boat that had capsized. They rescued more than 100 people. They brought them in. Now, what I found interesting about this is that this was tremendously humane, very efficient, and very well done. They treated these people extremely well on Lampedusa. On the other hand, the locals that I spoke to in Lampedusa were totally against this. They said, why do we have to send our Coast Guard out so far out to rescue these people? This is not our problem. These are not our wars. What are we going to do with these people? So let me then ask you, you have these ideas. You want your government to accept these people, but maybe that's against the grain in your country. Democratically, the majority don't want this policy. Is that how it is?
Well, no, I don't think it's so. I think that the question of the immigrants' invasion has been a highly politically manipulated item. I don't deny it's a problem, but I deny strongly that it is an invasion. And I do believe that people, of course, in Lampedusa, which is a very, very small island, of course, felt abandoned in some way. And from the human point of view, I can understand them. But the question is that it's not a Lampedusa issue. It's at least a national issue, and more of that is a European issue. But that is what has not happened yet. And of course, if it doesn't become European priorities, Italy will not be able to cope on her own. What we are also trying, and I'm not so sure, is to intervene in Africa, trying to foster their economic conditions, but that will take generations. So we should do it. I'm nothing against, but that developing the economic in Africa will take generation. And I started pointing the priority for Africa in the 80s. Yes. And I was trying to make people understand that if we don't care of Africa, one day Africa will be will come to Europe, evidently. So we are late, and now we have to deal this transition, hoping that the economic development in Africa will boom, but that again will take generation. In the meantime, global mobility is an issue that becomes to humanity. People have moved always, always.
Absolutely.
Italians have been emigrating by millions in between the two wars. I'm saying by millions.
Yes.
Out of poverty, looking for better solutions. So we know what we are talking about. And in a rich and declining demographically speaking Europe, be it Italy, Spain, Portugal, Germany, Bulgaria, and etc., and at 300 kilometers, you have a sort of a kindergarten with a demographic explosion. That is the issue that has to be managed, and I understand that that's not the responsibility of a small Lampedusa island.
Emma Bonino, it's been a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. Thank you very much for joining us. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, Donald Trump freezes aid to Pakistan. Will these longtime allies reconcile, or will Islamabad find a new best friend in China? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.